first day as president, Joe Biden ordered federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies to prepare a review of how the administration should fight terrorism. By last June, that report was complete. It concluded that after more than 20 years, Islamic terror is no longer the greatest threat to this country. Instead, the agencies declared that domestic political extremism is, quote, the most urgent terrorism threat the United States faces today. That's a very stark assessment, so you have to ask, who exactly are these terrorists who threaten us so urgently? And they're not who you might expect. The report did not even mention the BLM riots, the deadly BLM riots that had just taken place. There wasn't a word about Antifa. There was nothing about the gunmen who murdered 800 Americans in the city of Chicago last year, many of them children. No, they weren't there. Instead, the Biden administration declared that the, quote, most lethal elements of today's domestic terror threat are political conservatives. They're people who disagree with Joe Biden. Now, that report was released almost exactly 6 months ago this Friday. It received relatively little attention, and it hasn't since. And no major news organization even asked the most obvious question. These terrorists who threaten us, where are they? If Trump voters are really the most, quote, lethal threat that our country faces today, where are all the people they've killed? That's not an easy question to answer. Just look at the numbers, which are fairly tidily kept. Take a look at all the Americans who died by violence over the past 12 months, and there are many thousands and thousands of Americans. I'm going to ask a simple question. How many of them were killed by right-wingers for political reasons? Not many. Or since we're talking about threats here, pose the question another way. Are you more in danger walking through a neighborhood that votes 90% Democrat or a neighborhood that votes 90% Republican? Come on. This claim is ridiculous. On its face, there is no substantial right-wing terror threat in this country. Certainly not in relative terms. There just isn't. And no one's shown there is. The White House knows this, of course. They can read the numbers as well as anyone else can. So they're working hard to create the illusion of that threat. Much hangs on their ability to do that. You may remember the story this fall about a group called the National School Boards Association, which sent a letter to the feds asking the DOJ to take a look at parents who don't like their kids' curriculums. Well, the Justice Department responded immediately. Talk about customer service. Days later, the Attorney General announced the FBI would investigate moms who dared to complain at school board meetings as potential terrorists.
Hydron cropping tool.
Many people were shocked by this story, but we just learned it's worse even than we thought it was. A new Freedom of Information Act request has revealed that the National School Boards Association asked the feds to investigate parents because the feds asked them to ask the feds to investigate parents. See how that works? Apparently, the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, told school board administrators to write their letter to the White House. The White House then used that letter as a pretext to begin a crackdown on parents. See how that works? The snake eating its tail. When you don't have enough domestic terrorists to justify a political purge, then you just go ahead and create them. And that's exactly what they've been doing. This week, the campaign against this new American Al-Qaeda entered a new and very ominous phase. Again, little noticed by the national media. This Tuesday, 2 days ago, the DOJ announced the creation of a new domestic terrorism unit. What will it do? Well, it will target, quote, anti-authority ideologues. Anti-authority ideologues. Now, keep in mind, this country was founded by people who are anti-authority ideologues. That's why they created America and baked the idea of opposing authority, so it doesn't get too big and take over your life, into our founding documents. These ideas are central to the American idea. In fact, they are the American idea. But in this administration, they're not current. Here's Matt Olson, the Assistant Attorney General, explaining.
We face an elevated threat from domestic violence.
There's many thousands in there. I'm just playing around.
In the United States who seek to commit violent criminal acts in furtherance of domestic, social, or political goals. Domestic violent extremists are often motivated by a mix of ideologies and personal grievances. We've seen a growing threat from those who are motivated by racial animus, as well as those who ascribe to extremist, anti-government, and anti-authority ideologies. I've decided to establish a domestic terrorism unit to augment our existing approach. This group of dedicated attorneys will focus on the domestic terrorism threat.
Who's the threat to the country? That guy is the threat to the country, and the people working for him and those propping him up, and the people spreading the core lie here, which is that American citizens who distrust the government or don't like its policies are terrorists. Just today on MSNBC, Jason Johnson, one of its contributors, described the entire Republican Party as a terrorist organization. So you can see where this is going. Again, and we're quoting now, this is the Assistant Attorney General, we have seen a growing threat from those who subscribe to anti-government and anti-authority ideologies. Really, is that threat growing? Is it true? Let's see here. That threat is being used to justify the creation of this agency. But it's not rooted in
Looks like the
reality.
outlines of body
27 years
imagery
ago,
right here. A canine.
168 people were murdered in the Oklahoma City
It's,
bombing.
you know, cloudy and not very clear, but
Now, the
pointing
investigation
it
into
out.
what happened that day involved nearly 30,000 interviews. Investigators gathered 7,000 pounds of evidence. We could go on. It was an enormous investigation. Attorney General Merrick Garland, by the way, was part of it at the time. Here's the point. Despite the size of that investigation, no one suggested, even hinted, that we might need to create a new domestic terror division within the DOJ to handle the problem. No. The whole thing was handled by FBI field offices, as things like this had been for many decades. The FBI field offices did their jobs. The man accused of doing it got the death penalty, and you may have noticed it didn't happen again. And then Joe Biden became president. And the number of so-called domestic terror investigations more than doubled. So the question is, what exactly are they investigating? If there's no substantial death toll from these terrorists in our midst, what exactly are the feds looking into? Well, they're taking a close look at crimes like the plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a plot that helped her political fortunes considerably.
Oh, because I was still on play. I'm sorry.
In the end, turned out to have more FBI agents and informants involved than would-be kidnappers. The guy the Fed said were running it turned out to be homeless. He was living in the basement of a vacuum repair shop. His friends called him Captain Autism. And they called him that for a reason. He wasn't the ringleader of anything. He couldn't have been. The whole thing was ridiculous. But it stoked the storyline that was politically expedient, and so the media uncritically promoted it again and again, as if it were real. The media's job, by the way, to remind you, is to push back against government statements to find out if they're actually true. Because it turns out politicians may say things for political reasons, and it's the media's job to discern truth from spin. The media's job is not to act as spokesmen for the people in power. And yet that's what they're doing. Now the DOJ, in case you haven't noticed, has decided that the January 6th protesters are the real terrorists. They're the insurrectionists you keep hearing about. And yet, weirdly, as of just 2 days ago, not one American citizen had actually been charged by the federal government with insurrecting. Watch them in there.
Has anyone been charged with the crime of insurrection following January 6th?
I am not aware that anyone has been charged with that particular offense, even if it is an offense. I just am not aware of that.
Oops. They can't actually be insurrectionists if no one has committed insurrection. That's pretty embarrassing. Apparently the DOJ finally realized how embarrassing it was. So about 48 hours after the testimony you just saw, and more than a year after January 6th, today the feds announced that they will charge someone with sedition after all. Now, if you've got any questions about the timing of these charges or the merit of the sedition case the DOJ just announced, the Biden administration would like to remind you to keep those questions to yourself. And just to make certain you do keep them to yourself or are unable to share them with anyone else, today Joe Biden also announced a crackdown on the news media. As he put it, a crackdown on anyone who spreads, quote, disinformation and misinformation about the government. Watch.
If you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it. Personal choice impacts us all, our hospitals, our countries. I make a special appeal to social media companies and media outlets. Please deal with the misinformation and disinformation that's on your shows. It has to stop.
The misinformation that's on your shows. Yeah. Message received. It has to stop, Joe Biden says. So that means that big tech and media organizations have to do what he says, just like his vax mandate, found unconstitutional today, by the way. It'll still be enforced because big businesses
Sure
rely
is.
on the government to exist. They take government money. They are regulated from the very top to the very bottom by the government. So it takes a lot to defy the President of the United States. If he tells you to do something, you'd better do it. What Joe Biden is telling media companies to do today is to censor their content so it doesn't contradict his decrees. Now, CNN has no problem with this. In fact, they made fun of what Joe Biden said today. They made fun of his call for censorship. Not because it's obviously unconstitutional, which it is, but because it wasn't quite fascist enough. One of those weird-looking media reporters over at CNN wrote this, quote, "I'm sure the Murdochs will get right on this now that this special appeal has been made!" Exclamation point. So they understand exactly what's going on here. Joe Biden is targeting Fox News for censorship. His call for censorship,
Everybody.
by the way, comes after hundreds of doctors and scientists called on Spotify to adopt a
Why I'm trying to get this
policy
series
that would
done
shut
real
down
quick.
Joe Rogan's podcast.
Hopefully it'll get out
Rogan
there.
recovered from COVID without the vax, and they hate him for it. So it's not just the government, of course. It's people acting on behalf of the government calling for the same thing, which is censorship of political opinion. What you're seeing here is dangerous. There's no other way to describe it. Far more dangerous than domestic terror threat they've been bloviating about.
It was exactly planned and forecasted and told beforehand.
The government cannot coordinate with private actors to censor free speech. Period. The Supreme Court has made that very clear over centuries.
Period.
And yet that's exactly what's happening. Joe Biden.
Because there is no
today. Care to complain
constitution.
about
It was
that?
bullshit story.
Probably not. You may have noticed what happens. to
Both
people who
sides go
complain too
along with
much.
it.
Roger Stone, for example,
Because
complained
just
an awful lot
everybody
about the government.
plays off each
He did
other
it
while it
loudly,
all
often,
happens
he did
right
it
in
for
front of
years.
our
The
eyes.
DOJ didn't like it. So in the end, they accused Roger Stone on the basis of zero evidence whatsoever of colluding with Russia. In the end, they charged him with lying to Congress, something that happens literally every day of the year. But in his case, they made it a felony, threatened to send him to prison for the rest of his life. In the meantime, they sent a helicopter, a boat, and armed paramilitaries to his home at dawn after coordinating the raid with CNN. Really one of the darkest moments in civil liberties in recent history. We still have the tape. Let's watch it again.
Exclusive footage you're looking at right now from CNN as the FBI arrives at Roger Stone's residence in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, taking him into custody. They arrived before dawn there, before 6 a.m. or just after 6 a.m. A dozen officers were told.
So they coordinate with CNN just to make sure it's all preserved on tape to send the message to everybody else for the encouragement of the others, as the French used to say. And then they send guys with automatic weapons to your house to shut you up, to destroy you. Now, the people who ordered that raid should have been brought up on charges themselves. But they weren't. They were promoted. And now, thanks to Joe Biden, they have more power to harass their political enemies. You feel safer?
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to find Biden the lowest mark since he took office. His approval rating plummeted to a dismal 33%. And those surveyed also gave him a thumbs down when it comes to handling the big issues of the day, the economy, foreign policy, and COVID. Plus, the headlines, not kind to the president. They warn about his stalled agenda and highlight the fears the Democrats now have about the upcoming midterm elections, where the party is in danger of losing control of Congress. Yet the president doesn't seem to be changing anything about his strategy, especially when it comes to COVID. Just moments ago, a short time ago, he vilified people who have chosen not to get the vaccine again.
I've been saying that as we remain in this pandemic. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And I mean by this, right now, both vaccinated and unvaccinated people are testing positive. But what happens after that could not be more different. If vaccinated people test positive, they overwhelmingly have either no symptoms at all, or they have mild symptoms.
Douglas, when you hear that,
He's
people
fucking-
come back with something that doesn't quite fit. Like, we know that whether you're
Oh,
vaccinated
boy.
or not, you're exposed to Omicron. You're hoping to mitigate that with the vaccine. The president instead just keeps poking the bear and pointing fingers at people making the decision that they've made.
That's right. By the way, I'm surprised he's making as good figures as he is in the approval ratings at the moment.
They're at 3%.
I'm surprised
That's
he's
terrible.
I'm surprised he's riding that high.
Wow.
I mean, this is a president who, apart from anything else, has been dodging the media, dodging accountability for months now. In any other democracy, this wouldn't be acceptable. You have a commander-in-chief who will not answer basic questions about his decisions. His views and his policies don't get a chance to get gone over by the media. I mean, most other democracies don't work like this. You know, the president would get held accountable. And he just repeatedly makes statements, incredibly inflammatory statements, incredibly inflammatory speeches like the one earlier this week, and there's no accountability. And, you know, he said, remember, his great pitch for becoming president was that he was going to be the great unifier and that his predecessor had been the great divider. But he has kept using speeches and statements, such as he makes them, to divide America still further. Look at the stuff on voting reform this week. It was basically, either you're with me or you're a Nazi. You know, is that the talk of unification?
Sure is.
You know, Kaylee, last hour on the Faulkner Focus, I counted 4 times where unification was where people were teeing off on the president. And I hear it again from Douglas now, and it's almost like we need to hear from the president on who he wants to be now, because who he's presenting is completely oppositional now to who he said he was going to be in office, which I guess is why Senator McConnell says, I don't know who that guy was.
Yeah, he gave his inauguration speech and used some version of the word unity like half a dozen times. This is the most divisive president
Same thing
I've
Obama did.
seen in the last 2 decades, especially when
Same thing Obama did. Obama was even worse. Obama just spoke better, was better looking, and he was black, so no one could say anything.
That speech that he gave was one of the most divisive I have heard, saying if you oppose the federalizing of elections, if you oppose it, you are essentially a segregationist. Meanwhile,
Democrats break down the system their way, Republicans break down the system their way.
This is division. Americans are noticing it because in Quinnipiac asked, is he uniting us or dividing us? 49% said dividing, 42% said unifying. So Americans are recognizing the strategy, and I hope the administration's recognizing the 5-alarm fire they have on their hands with Quinnipiac, left-wing polling organization who said Andrew Gillum was going to be the governor of Florida. He's not. It's Ron DeSantis. But that poll, left-wing poll in my view, showing 33% approval. I was stunned when I saw that and had to double-check the numbers. That's a 5-alarm fire. It's going to invite primary challengers and probably more than one, if I had to guess.
Kaylee, just to quickly kind of double down with my questioning on this, because I am curious, when do you really start paying attention to polling? I mean, you've been in a White House before, so you know, yeah, maybe 1 or 2, maybe a couple of months. I mean, this has been a stubborn slog in the numbers for this president for months now.
Yeah, anyone who says they're not looking at the polls in that administration, and Biden has said that, is deceiving you. They are looking at the polls. What you are seeing is absolute panic in the White House. It's why they're desperately trying to get something passed on the Hill. It's why they're pivoting to this voting rights agenda that is just sowing division in the messaging that they're creating. It's getting worse and worse for them. They say they're not looking at polls. Harris, take my word. They are looking at the polls. How could you not with 33% approval?
You know, Emily, when I think about what the administration and the White House and the president should do next in terms of meeting these numbers with a message, I am confused, conflicted about what that message should be. Like, where do you start?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be honest, I don't know. It's sort of like walking into an abandoned, falling down haunted house, and you're like, I don't even know where to start with a renovation. But you know what, Harris? Who cares? With the exception of the fact that this is our commander-in-chief, who is absolutely reprehensible in the dereliction of duty. Let's just put that aside for a second, because the Republicans are coming for him. And that's the strong messaging, that's the unified messaging that people are following. So, for example, the National Republican Campaign Committee, they reported that this year, they didn't just break records of fundraising in an off-election year, they blew it out of the water. They report a $17.9 million haul just last month. They brought in over $140 million in 2021, and that's just not in the macro, in the micro sense. For example, Kevin McCarthy, he brought in a whopping $11.75 million in donations and fundraising. In just Q4, $72.4 million this cycle. So here's the thing.
Big cash.
Regardless what the Democrats think that they are doing and the messaging, the confusion that they're putting out in the media, the things that they think people care about, Americans know what they care about, and that is putting food on the table, job security, safety at our borders, safety in their streets, and protection to earn the livelihood that protects their families. And those are the things that are lending them to put their money where their mouths are, and that's for the Republican Party right now.
Yeah, the chairwoman of the RNC and I talked this week about those numbers. And if you saw Tommy, just a few moments ago, Kevin McCarthy at the lectern talking in a news conference about what really should be the things to focus on, as Emily just laid out. I mean, you only raise more money when you promise to actually come up with solutions to all the crises that are out there, I would imagine.
And I do believe, contrary to everybody else in the panel, I do believe that Joe Biden is a great unifier. I believe that he is unifying not only Republicans, but I believe he is unifying the American people against this woke, do-nothing agenda of his administration. I think even the most leftist of the leftists,
Of course, it's the end of the Civil War.
to see the light, and that is why Democrats are panicking. Democrats are also coming together and unifying against this president. As I've said before on this program, I believe what is going to happen, and we're already seeing it, is Democrats are going to distance themselves not only from Joe Biden, but from Kamala Harris. They're not going to distance themselves from the agenda because it is their agenda to begin with, but they will distance themselves from Joe and Kamala because they're going to make it seem like those two are the only problems. You saw that with Stacey Abrams just the other day. She probably has aspirations for 2024. We're even seeing it with Al Sharpton coming out and criticizing Joe Biden. Democrats are going to attempt to gaslight the American people into believing it is just Joe and it is just Kamala, but it's more than that. It is their agenda, it is their party that is the problem, and the American people as a whole, Republican and Democrat, would do well to remember that in the midterms and especially in 2024.
You point out something that is so important just in terms of looking at the landscape ahead, and that is the fact that it is their agenda. And he's not carrying the flag the way that many would want. Look, we're still waiting to hear back from Fair Action, that political action committee by Stacey Abrams, to see what conflict on her schedule would be more important than a key issue for her and a visiting president. We haven't heard back from them. I'm not holding my breath on that. But, you know, you bring up such a great point, Tommy, just in terms of how they plan down the road. Who can you count on and who can't you count on? Apparently not the people in the White House. Douglas, I'm going to give you the last word.
The Justice Department and the weaponization of intelligence and criminalizing political differences, and of course the biggest abuse of power corruption scandal in U.S. history, that of course being the Russia hoax, and one of the main figures targeted in Mueller's witch hunt and the deep state's efforts to destroy Donald Trump and his allies and his family is former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. Mueller and his team wanted Paul Manafort to die in jail, and they tried hard. And they also put him in solitary confinement for nearly a year. Why? To hope to break him. Ask yourself, prosecutors destroyed his life. Where's the accountability for those that filed false information with the FISA court, those that used the dirty disinformation, Russian Hillary Clinton bought and paid for Russian misinformation dossier, listened to Christopher Steele, even when they knew it was false, they continued to use the dossier, illegally spying on candidate Trump, transition team Trump, President Trump. Now, last year, Paul Manafort was pardoned by President Trump. He's now ready to tell his side of the story. He has a forthcoming book. It's called Political Prisoner. It will be out fairly soon, revealing new details about the unequal standard of justice and the Russia hoax. He joins us now for his first interview since being pardoned. Paul Manafort, well, you look healthy. I'm sure it's better wearing a suit and tie than an orange suit, right?
It's great to be here with you, Sean, after all these years. Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity today.
You really, in many ways, you, Roger Stone, Papadopoulos, General Flynn, and Carter Page, the president himself, all of this stems from a false, phony narrative based on a false dossier and phony FISA warrants. Tell us about the whole experience from your point of view.
Well, from my point of view, it's been a very complicated for the last 5 years, and certainly not a fun experience. A lot of surprises when things first started to break and the false narrative first started to be promoted in August of 2016. I didn't take it very seriously because I knew how ridiculous it was to even say that there was Russian collusion going on with the Trump campaign. But as time went on and as the drumbeat got louder and all of a sudden anonymous government sources started putting out stories which I knew were fake, and working with social media and the mainstream media to promote this concept that there was serious investigation going on with people around Donald Trump, and particularly around people like me and Roger Stone. I said, how do I combat this? I felt like I was in the middle of a tsunami, and there's no way my voice was going to be heard against all of this onslaught of misinformation. And then, of course, when they did ultimately indict me, they threw a gag order on me and made it impossible for me to speak, even though they kept leaking stories that have been proven false. And then when I started to fight against that gag order, they threw me in jail, where they deliberately knew what they were doing. They didn't want me to speak to the media. They wanted to keep me from my lawyers and affect my ability to prepare for my trial. And frankly, from day one, I always felt they were targeting me and a couple of others to try and get at the president, then candidate Trump, and then President Trump. Which is one of the reasons why I find it sort of ironic that what's going on today with these claims about January 6th, when the people who are pushing the January 6th allegations are the very ones who for 4.5 years refused to recognize the results of the 2016 election. So this book that I'm writing is meant to tell my side of the story, get out my side of the facts, to tell the truth about my career in politics and government, and to let the reader understand what really was going on in the Trump Tower meeting of June 9th.
You mentioned the gag order. Roger Stone similarly had a gag order. I thought we had something called the First Amendment that allows you to speak out, but apparently...
No, apparently you were wrong.
I must have been to a
Share that
Catholic
information with
school
Candace Owens for me.
But that
Let
was
her
taken
know
away from
you guys were wrong.
Then they put you
There
in
is no such
solitary
thing as a
confinement.
constitution.
And I don't know how much you want to reveal here before the book comes out.
There was for about 3 days, and it was all torn down.
Moments where they were offering to set you free if you said certain things.
Well, there were moments, and I will talk about this in the book, when they were putting pressure on me to admit the facts that weren't true, and I'll talk about those facts and those expectations, and the quid pro quo that was understood.
This is pretty cool all going on in
treated
here.
in a very lenient way. They didn't understand that there was no way I was going to lie, and there was no way that they could force me into giving up the president. And I never felt uncomfortable talking to them because I knew that as long as I told the truth, I had nothing to fear.
Yeah, right.
I was wrong. Because
what was the reason then for what was the reason for solitary? My interpretation was they were trying to break you. And I remember at the time you were suffering some health issues as a result of it. Were they afraid
to
of
the
your
side
safety?
with you.
How were the prisoners when you got to finally see them? Did they treat you well? Were they nice to you? Or were they a threat to you?
The prisoners were never an issue with me. The special prosecutor was. They're the ones who put me into what I view as harm's way.
So then why solitary?
Is a terrible thing.
Why solitary then?
Confinement is well, they said it was to protect me. But I never believed that for a minute. That it didn't protect me. What it did was it put me in a situation that was, in an 8x10 room with no windows, with no access to people, no access to outside, and limited ability to communicate with my lawyers. And I talk about that in the book, and I talk about how, it's inhumane what they call solitary confinement. Then they even tried to get me to go to Rikers Island and force me to be there in solitary, which fortunately, thanks to the Department of Justice, that didn't happen because there was a issue of safety for me in any context there.
Only because of the constraints of time. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I know we'll do a full hour when your book does come out. There's details that you've told me that when people hear it, will be blown away. I'm trying to ask this in a way that we don't give away the whole book here, because you also talk about the campaign and how Mike Pence was chosen, and you bring us behind the scenes and the work that you were doing. My sources have been telling me for a long time that Robert Mueller, he was kind of checked out. I'm being nice. In other words, he kind of suffered from the same cognitive decline that Joe Biden has. A, is that true? Did you see him much? And B, if it wasn't him, who was putting all this pressure on you? His hitman, Mr. Weissman?
Yeah, I never was. I saw Robert Mueller walking down the hallway once. Other than that, I had no contact with him. And frankly, he didn't look like he knew who I was when I saw him. Yes, it was Weissman. I mean, he was the one that was the lead prosecutor on my case.
It's Pitbull.
And from day one, he was the one who. I mean, they so overcharged me in my case that Judge Ellis in Virginia actually admonished them from the bench, saying, "Why are you bringing all of these charges? You want to put this guy in jail forever?" And they were trying to put me in jail forever. I mean, unless I would cooperate, that was what they were promising to do. And in fact, when we did the presentation in the D.C. case, they argued for the maximum penalty.
Prefer the Dem who barked like a dog to the fellow who's forever in a fog. Yeah, the Dem's best hope will have you in awe. It's the evil grandma from Chappaqua. That is so Dr. Seussian. According to the Wall Street Journal, Hillary Clinton could be making a huge political comeback and run for president a third time in 2024. Yeah, Clinton is like COVID. We thought we were done with this, but here comes another strain. And while most think a political future bought the farm, it's like the old saying, third time's a complete lack of charm. Two Democrat operatives writing in the Journal say, quote, "A perfect storm in the Democratic Party is making a once unfathomable scenario plausible, a political comeback for Hillary Clinton in 2024. If Democrats lose control of Congress in 2022, Mrs. Clinton can use the party's loss as a basis to run for president again, enabling her to claim the title of change candidate." Yeah, I agree. Of course, Joe could also run as the change candidate, because after his economic blunders, that's all you'll have in your pocket. Change. See what I did there? Play on words. Yeah, not that good, though. The piece spotlights his plunging poll numbers and Kamala's unpopularity, which have created a, quote, leadership vacuum in the party. But you kind of got to feel for old Joe. The body's not even cold, and they're already plotting Hillary's return. Joe, what do you think?
Hey, look. I don't think about her much, all right? I don't think about her. She's not even in my top 5 Hillarys that I tend to think about. Number 1 Hillary, I'd say Hillary Swank. Or should I say, Hannah Montana. It's a good movie, I like her. Number 2, Hillary Duff. Hillary Duff, Big Girls Don't Cry, right? Good song. They made a musical out of it. It was actually, some of the scenes were based on some of the tough guys I used to run with. I've said that before, I'm gonna get in trouble. Number 3, Hillary Clinton is number 3. So she made the top 5, but I don't think of her much. When she was vice president, her husband, he kept having sex with people. All right, I can't say that. Look, on your mark, get set, get out of town.
I don't know what just happened there, but all right, Blago, if she can have a political comeback, why not you? Huh? Has this made you think? No?
Well, about her comeback, let me just say this. One of the things you get to do that's actually positive in prison is you can catch up on your reading. I've read a lot of books and some history books. If she runs again, she will be like William Jennings Bryan and Henry Clay. She will lose 3 times for the presidency, which is what happened to those 2 guys.
Yeah.
I can't imagine she'll win. What she'll do is she will argue that she's the change candidate and just blatantly lie to the American people without even batting an eye. And that's a lot of professional politicians are.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, it's like, what a rematch if Trump runs. Oh my God, I don't know if we're ready for that, Jamie. What do you think of this? Are you happy that she might run again? Are you unhappy? Do you have another porn joke you'd like to share?
No, that's the only one I have, unfortunately. But don't you almost feel bad of the lack of options?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is like you're starving, and the only thing open is the Waffle House.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like, I'm going to pick something, but no matter what, I know my stomach's going to hurt for the next 4 years.
Yes.
I think Biden was surprised by his numbers being down. I don't know if you saw that clip, but his approval ratings are now down to family and people that host shows on CNN.
Oh, yes.
And it's not good. I don't know, man. What do they? How can they be the only? How can this be their best options?
I don't know.
How can this be the best possible option? And Biden really was confused. He was like, I thought my numbers were through the roof, and they're like, that was your blood pressure. We keep going over this.
Oh, nice. All right, there.
Well, let's have a rematch. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Kat, what do you think?
What do I think?
Yes.
Well, I think that saying that she's the best option, another way of saying that is there's no good options.
Right.
Like, there's no the change. It's like she's been around forever.
Right.
And politics, people always talk about, but she's so qualified. She's qualified.